whether or not transgender athletes have a right to compete as the gender that they identify with. So let's watch the clip, and then I've got a fair amount of post-analysis for this topic.
Well, the age of female athletics may be coming to an end. A new age is upon us, the age of the transgender athlete. Rachel McKinnon, a biological male, has just become the first transgender person to win a world title in cycling. On Sunday, McKinnon won the women's 35-44 sprint at the World Championships in Los Angeles. The third-place finisher in that race has publicly complained that the result was unfair. McKinnon replied by denouncing this person for transphobia, which is almost always the way it goes. Don't respond on the merits, attack the motives. Amy Peikoff is a feminist, a talk show host, and blogs at don'tletitgo.com, and she joins us tonight. Amy, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Oh, well, I just want to get your take on this. So, look, women's athletics exists in a separate category for a biological reason, because women on average, not all, but on average, are differently built.
Yes.
And so this seems like a huge challenge to the idea of women's athletics, and yet none of the people whose job it is to defend women, they tell us, are saying anything about it. Why is that?
I don't know why it is, because I believe that it's a wonderful thing that most of our societies today allow for women to compete in athletics, because it gives you, the thrill of competition, a great sense of accomplishment, plus all the benefits of exercise and everything else. And this enterprise depends on segregating women for what it is. Why? Because women are on average less strong than men are, right? We have less muscle mass. And so there really is an issue here, and I'll get into the science a little if you give me a chance. But one thing I want to say overall is Professor McKinnon, I disagree with her about what a right to compete is. I don't understand it the way that she does. A right to compete does not entail the right to have an organization host a competition that is willing to accept you as a competitor. If those exist out there, it's great. And as I said, I'm very happy that we do have women's competition.
But what would happen to the WNBA if men describe themselves, biological men, and I don't want to get into the debate. I mean, call yourself whatever you want, but biology's real, and if biological men compete, then that disenfranchises the women who make real salaries.
Yeah, I'm going to call them transgender females because in general I'm supportive of transgenders, and I've got quite a bit of education about it from a great blogger. He goes by HD. He has a blog called Hormones Demystified, and he first of all, told me that this is a real condition, but he also pointed me to some research. And Tucker, there's very little research that is quantitative in terms of the amount of muscle mass that transgender females retain even after going through
but so wouldn't you want to do, I think the essence of what you just said is there's very little research. We don't know.
Right, and there is one study, and the one study that does exist shows that transgender females retain more muscle mass than biological females who haven't gone through any hormone treatment.
Of course they do, but why wouldn't the people in charge of protecting women from unfair competition be standing up and saying, I'm sorry, my job is to protect women? Where are the protectors?
I think because so many of them are liberal-minded and they have in mind this overall right to compete again. The idea that everybody who wants to compete has a right to be allowed to participate in a competition of their choice,
But the rights of everyone else also, I would say, play a role, but not in this case. Amy, thank you for that smart explanation of it. I appreciate it.
All right, so there's obviously a lot we could discuss within the umbrella of transgenderism. We could talk about its historical prevalence, the underlying biological factors versus social and environmental risk factors. Then there's the compelled gender pronoun use debate, the bathroom debate, and so on. And I'm sure we will have many opportunities in the future to critically examine some of these subtopics in proper depth, but for this video, let's keep it focused on the sports issue, this so-called right to compete. And on this argument, I do agree with Tucker and Amy that it's an absurd concept. No one has a right to compete in someone else's sporting event. Whoever organizes the competition sets the rules and the eligibility criteria, and as it so happens, many of the big sports organizations do allow transgender athletes to participate, provided they meet specific criteria for mandatory treatments and blood testosterone levels. And I will link below an article which provides the current transgender eligibility criteria for both the NCAA and the International Olympic Committee. But before I go any further, I've been on YouTube long enough to know that there's inevitably going to be some hateful comments directed at transgender people in the comment section, and I just want to say that there's two positions you can have on this debate. Transgender people and their advocates typically argue that it's a rare but naturally occurring phenomenon in human biology that does not and should not fall under the category of a mental disorder. Earlier this year, the World Health Organization also embraced this position when they reclassified gender incongruence from a mental disorder to a sexual health condition. The other position, which is the one that I hold, is that transgenderism is indeed a mental disorder that arises from some poorly understood combination of biological susceptibility and assisting environmental factors to ultimately produce a stable state of gender dysphoria in an adolescent or an adult. But regardless of the specific cause, it is nevertheless maladaptive and therefore should be classified and treated as a disorder. So with this understanding in mind, I ask you guys to be compassionate. If you do believe, as I do, that transgenderism is a mental illness, then treat it the same way you would treat any other mental illness. We don't make fun of schizophrenia or autism or PTSD, right? So this shouldn't be any different. At the same time, we cannot and should not accept patently absurd breaches of common sense, such as permitting transgender female athletes to compete against and in many cases destroy biological women, and that's what this video is about. So while I am sympathetic to this transgender cyclist, Dr. Rachel McKinnon, and her struggle, I vigorously disagree with her claim that transgender people should be allowed to compete outside of their biological sex, and I will explain why. So let's begin with a brief recap of the story that Tucker led off with. This was the UCI Masters Track Cycling World Championship event, which is the premier track cycling competition for people 35 and up. And this trans woman, Dr. Rachel McKinnon, took first place in the women's sprint for the 35 to 39 age bracket. So here she is alongside silver and bronze. And the reason this story went viral is because she tweeted out this picture of her winning and then all hell broke loose. The third place winner, named Jen Wagner-Ossoli, tweeted out in response, "I was the third place rider. It's definitely not fair." Then the second place winner tweeted back, "I totally disagree. No one is a transgender to steal anyone's medal. We had an honest race under UCI rules. If you compete, you accept the rules, otherwise don't compete. I can only imagine what she had to go through in her life to be where she is now, how hard it is to fit in." Then Jen tweeted back at her, "Just because it's a current UCI rule doesn't make it fair or right, and rules can be changed." And then Dr. McKinnon entered the tweet battle. She tweeted at Jen, "Third place, Jennifer Wagner claims it's unfair for me to compete. At Masters Worlds, she beat me in the 500 meter. She beat me in 6 of 7 races at the 2017 Intelligentsia Cup. In 2016, she beat me in all 3 Speed Week circuits. She's won 11 of our 13 races, and it's unfair. Excuse me." And then she also tweeted, "This is what the double bind for trans women athletes looks like. When we win, it's because we're transgender and it's unfair. When we lose, no one notices, and it's because we're not that good anyway." So I'm guessing that Jen ended up taking some more backlash for her tweets before ultimately feeling bad and apologizing, because she later tweeted, "After having some time to reflect, I realized my Twitter comments earlier this week unintentionally fanned the flames on a controversial situation, and that I regret. I made the comments out of a feeling of frustration, but they weren't productive or positive. They were just inflammatory, and that's not who I want to be or am. While I may not agree with the rules, when I pin on a number, I agree to race by them. I also respect at Rachel V. McKinnon's right to compete within the rules. I'm sure there are men who don't agree with the USA cycling rule that women can enter their races, which I do all the time. I appreciate those who have reached out to support me, but please stop directing hateful or derogatory comments toward Rachel or trans people in general. At the end of the day, we are all just people trying to find our way in the world. I'm going to continue educating myself and hope this conversation continues in an open and positive way. I apologize at Rachel V. McKinnon for not properly congratulating you on race day. I hope you accepted a few days late. Congratulations and enjoy your off season. Thanks everyone for reading, Jennifer." Okay, so obviously lots of drama there, and they ultimately reconciled, but there's still the question of who was right. And I will give Dr. McKinnon credit for hard work. I don't think anyone is saying that transgender females will automatically beat biological women in every single sport without putting in significant effort. That's not the argument. The argument is that they still have an unfair advantage that should preclude them from fair competition against biological women. And of course, the specifics of the sport do matter. In power sports such as wrestling or football, or even sports that require more dynamic speed than cycling does, for example, tennis or soccer, in these types of sports, the disparity is pretty obvious. I don't think I need to spend too much time explaining why transgender females would have a significant advantage even after undergoing the required testosterone suppression treatments. You might recall the transgender female wrestler who won back-to-back girls' high school state championships in Texas. This was a story from earlier this year. So clearly testosterone doesn't tell the whole story, and we have lots of data now to support that. In fact, Dr. McKinnon actually likes to reference this study, which she summarized in a recent interview. In a recent study by Stéphane Berman and Pierre-Yves Garnier, they tested over 2,000 IAAF World Championship track and field athletes and found that a sixth of the male athletes were in or below the female range of testosterone. So a disproportionate amount of elite males have very low testosterone. This study showed there is absolutely no relationship between testosterone in terms of performance in males, and the relationship they found in women was weak and sporadic. Right, so in other words, blood testosterone level does not exclusively account for the consistent 10% performance gap between men and women across all Olympic sports. There are a lot of other contributing factors, and this was addressed in an article last year in Cycling Weekly, and here are some of those main findings. Jamie Pringle, a physiologist who has coached many world and Olympic champions, says, the most consistent observation about the difference is that women have lower total mass of hemoglobin in their blood compared to men, and less blood in total. This means less capacity to transport oxygen in the blood, which when combined with the heart's ability to pump that blood and the muscle's capacity to extract oxygen from it, is a key determinant of aerobic fitness and endurance. Here's another one. Men tend to be more muscular and have heavier bones, whereas women naturally have more body fat. The body fat issue is important because to climb well, it is advantageous to have low body fat. For a female athlete, having very low body fat risks both their bone and reproductive health. It goes on to say that the physiological differences, largely limiting power rather than endurance, suggest the gender performance gap should reduce as the distances increase. Male traits, more fast twitch fibers, more hemoglobin, and therefore higher VO2 max, are less advantageous in ultra-endurance events. In fact, certain female traits become advantageous. In cycling, it pays to be aerodynamic, says Pringle. A typically smaller framed female athlete is more aerodynamic and lighter in the hills. Ultra-distance cyclist Yasmin Muller agrees, whereas over shorter distances, males' larger muscles may help with sprinting efforts, they also fatigue more quickly. Women can keep going for longer on less fuel as they have proportionately more fat, which burns more slowly than carbs. Okay, so taken together, I think all of this research supports what most of us already understood from common sense and living in the world, which is that men and women have vastly different physiology, and this gives men a performance advantage in most but not all sporting events. That's why the testosterone suppression guidelines that are currently required to allow transgender females to compete against biological women is not enough to level the playing field in many, if not most sports. Blood testosterone is just one of many factors. So the fairness argument for why transgenders shouldn't be allowed to compete outside of their sex is a legitimate one, but I don't even think it's the best argument. I don't think the emphasis should be on whether or not a trans female athlete has sufficiently emasculated himself in terms of reducing his free testosterone, his muscle density, and everything down to the normal range for biological women. Science can probably accomplish a lot of that in the future, but that's not the point. The point is that these people are suffering from a mental illness, and we shouldn't be making highly disruptive accommodations in sports and public bathrooms and even free speech in an effort to normalize their condition. Instead of spending time and research on how to physically convert men into women and vice versa, we should be spending that time and money trying to develop an effective treatment for gender dysphoria, ideally one that works early on in childhood and adolescence. Again, this is a very tragic thing to deal with. It overlaps heavily with depression and suicide, but normalizing it is not a substitute for treatment. So to me, this is the better argument that we should be hearing, but let me know what you guys think. Please leave your thoughts in the comment section, and if there's a specific subtopic within the transgender debate that you'd like us to research in more depth and make a video about, then please join us on Patreon and put in a request. We are very responsive to the requests of our patrons, since that is the primary funding mechanism for this channel. If you're not into Patreon but you would still like to help out the channel, then please check out the links below in the description for other ways you can help us out. That's it for this one. Everyone take care, and I will see you guys in the next video.